Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me to discover the truth beneath the surface. As it turns out, I had a little unexpected break in my schedule this morning, and that left me with a nice chunk of time. So I figured I would take you folks on a coffee chat, a midweek coffee chat, which is rather unusual. So hopefully, folks are up for it, and we'll have a nice little chat this morning. I've really been reflecting the past couple of days on the amazing spiritual transformation that's happening in this country. I really have been sensing it more and more and more. I think it's quite clear to me that our citizenry, and really not just here in America, but all over the world, just like in the original Great Awakening, the historical Great Awakening that you learn about in school, everyone is turning back to God. Everyone is not simultaneously. We wish it would happen that way, but everybody is in the process. Not everyone, of course, but those who will ascend are in the process of turning back from what they had turned away from so long ago, and perhaps without their knowledge even. Because I think a lot of people out there, the way that they live their lives is that they go with the flow for the most part. Most people are conformists, and most people choose the path of least resistance. And they just assume that the general path, the popular path, the road most traveled is the right path, that's the virtuous path, because everybody is doing it. And if everybody is doing it, or if a majority of people are doing it, or if that's the perception, most people think, well, that must be the right thing to do. And of course, we understand that the mainstream media and the cabal, of course, they figured this out a long, long time ago. Basic human psychology. Now, obviously, that basic human psychology doesn't apply to all of us. But to the masses, and really even all of us, I think probably with very few exceptions, we would include ourselves in the masses. At least at one point in our lives, we considered ourselves to be part of that general group of people that just kind of went with the flow before we woke up, before we realized something was off. And the thing about awakening, not only is it a process, but it's also a process that begins at different times for different people. Because different people have a different threshold in terms of what they can actually process before they get to the point where they start asking questions, before that cognitive dissonance kicks in and they actually start saying, wait a second, like we all did years ago. But it took us some time to get to that point. Some move quicker than others. And, 107 was talking about this on a recent interview. The idea that people wake up at different stages and for different reasons. A lot of people out there are only focused on the stock market, or they're only focused on one or two different political issues, at least under normal circumstances. A lot of people, they don't really pay that much attention, you see. They just do what everyone else is doing. It's kind of like I was talking about before. But what's starting to happen, when I mentioned that folks are turning back to God, the first step toward turning back to God is turning towards the truth and trying to seek out the truth. And actually, maybe even before that is the cognitive dissonance phase, where you realize that what you're getting is not the truth. And I remember when I got to that point in my life, when I realized that everything I was watching on TV was fake, that it was all disinformation. What a huge revelation that was. And of course, I tried to share that with basically everyone around me, not understanding at that point what I do now about mind control and just in general, about people who just simply can't process the idea that the entire system is corrupt and evil, like I've talked about many times. But I wanted to share this information with everybody when I first found out. And I remember thinking to myself, how could you possibly not want to know the truth? How could you not want to know that you've been lied to? How could you not be curious about all this information, at least even if you don't want to believe it? How can you not at least be curious about it and want to see it, want to examine it? It's like if somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, have you ever seen a $3 bill?" I'd say, "No, there's no such thing as a $3 bill." If the person said to me, "Oh, really? Well, I've got one in my pocket. Do you want to see it?" My response would be, even though I know that, or at least I believe that the $3 bill doesn't exist, my response would be, "Yeah, if you got it in your pocket, pull it out. Let's take a look at it." And maybe it's not the greatest metaphor in the world, but take the same idea with information. This is what I did with people. I presented them with the idea, at least from their perspective, that a $3 bill actually exists. And not only that, I have one and I can show it to you. I can prove it to you. And instead of telling me to pull it out of my pocket and show it, they just want to argue with me. They don't even want me. They don't want to see what's in my pocket. They don't want to see what I'm telling them about. They just want to argue with me and say, "Oh, you're a bad person for even suggesting that a $3 bill might exist." And the whole time I'm saying, "Well, wait a second, I've got one right here." And at this point, take the metaphor a step further. I pull it out of my pocket and start waving it in their face. And instead of actually looking at it, they put their hands over their eyes. I mean, that's the type of insanity that we've been dealing with this entire time. But it really is starting to change. And of course, like we talk about all the time, yes, there are a number of folks out there who just are too far gone. And unfortunately, a lot of these people are relatives of mine. I have to kind of laugh in a sense, because if I don't, I'll cry. But a lot of the people that are near and dear to me, quite honestly, are they fall into that category of people that are so brainwashed and just so overzealous about their worldview, despite any kind of actual evidence, despite any kind of actual logic, any kind of truth, any kind of common sense. They're just completely committed. Yes, there are those subsets of our society. I mean, I've heard estimates that it could be it could be up to 20% of the population, really. 1 out of every 5 people. At this point, the mind control, the conditioning has gotten so bad that 1 out of 5 people, I mean, no matter what you tell them, I mean, they're going to sit there and they're going to argue with you all day long that the sky isn't blue. And can you imagine, I mean, if this had gone on any longer, I mean, if we hadn't hit this crossroads at this point, imagine if this had gone on for another 20 years, another 30 years, another 50 years even. How many people at that point would be too far gone? I mean, even if the enemy hadn't really ratcheted up their attack plans against us, but just kept us under this mind control and this propaganda machine, think about it. How many people? That's why we need that 80% consensus. Because I think the white hats recognize, as do all patriots, that there are these people. They're just not going to accept reality. Because it's at a certain point in time, I think there's a window almost, and the window of opportunity to get through to these people, or rather, I think, not really putting it on us. It's not like it's our responsibility, but the window of opportunity for these people to open up their own minds and challenge their own belief system is not infinite. I mean, there is a window. You have to make a choice. And that's the other thing. I mean, I've talked about this quite frequently, but, we can never lose sight of the fact. We can talk about the mind control all day long, and we can talk about what the enemy has done to us, how they victimized humanity. But we can also never lose sight of the fact that free will is also the number one law of the universe. I mean, Gene Decode has talked about this on my show as well. Ultimately, God gave us dominion over the earth. He gave us free will. Free will is absolute. We get to choose whatever we want. And so we can't lose sight of that, because that is an enormous, first of all, I mean, if it's God's primary law within the universe, that, of course, and to love one another, which I'm going to talk about. I think we need to pay attention to that. And we need to remember that we can't just look at, let's just say, these 20% of people in our population. We can't just simply look at them as, well, these people were just simply victimized. We have to remember that these people also made a conscious decision about what they were going to choose to believe, what they gravitated toward. And they made the decision that they were going to reject all of the evidence, all of the truth. I mean, let's just take the example of the thing that goes in your arm, an issue that's going to affect all of these people. One way or another, the information was out there. The information remains out there. I mean, I was just talking to some relatives of mine. Of course, they're fully jabbed up, and now they're making their appointments to go get their boosters. And again, this is the majority, this mentality. I mean, this is the majority of people that I'm surrounded by, which is, like I've said so many times, one of the main reasons why I decided to do this podcast, so that I wouldn't go insane. I could connect with other people out there who actually have some semblance of common sense, some ability to be able to discern the truth. And, you know, it's just completely lacking in my own life with so many of these people. And these are people that I deeply love. This is family, folks. These are people that I care about. And unfortunately, I tried and I failed to be able to get through to them. But I think the reason that I talk about this so often is because, I don't know, maybe there's some semblance of guilt on my part that I didn't do enough. But I also have to remember, I mean, the truth is that's actually not true. I did everything that I could. I mean, heck, I did more probably than I should have, even. You know, I begged people, I pleaded with people not to do this. And I mean that. I actually, I got very close to begging certain people, don't do this. Just wait. I'm not even telling you don't do it for the rest of your life. I mean, I really am, but, you know, in my appeal to them, I even said, you know, if a year or two goes by and it turns out that I was wrong, then sure, go ahead, go get it. If circumstances change, go ahead, go get it. But why don't you just wait and see what happens first? Why don't you just not put yourself in the experimental group? I mean, heck, if there's an experiment going on, I don't know about you, but I'd rather be in the control group rather than the experimental group. And this is what I was trying to say to these people. And again, no matter how many times I said it's 99.999, I mean, pick your decimal, percent survivable. Why would you want to put this in your body when you don't even know what it is? You don't even know what it's going to do. I mean, heck, if we're really talking about the bubonic plague here or something like that, where 1 out of 3 people were just dropping dead in the street, I could understand the mentality of people lining up to try to get something that would save their life. But the reality of the matter is that when you look at the real numbers, the real statistics, and this is not hard to do, I mean, it's just prima facie how crazy this is. And it just amazes me too, the things that people are so afraid of. I mean, I can tell you, I'll give you an example. My parents are much older now, as you might expect. And of course, they're lumped into these these family members that I was just talking about. Primary examples of people that I've tried to reach over and over and over and over and over again, and have rejected everything I've said over and over and over and over again. And you know what? They're not at all concerned, you see, about what's inside that vial. I mean, every time I try to point this out, do you even actually know what's in there? No, they trust the science. They trust the doctors. Excuse me. They trust Fauci. Why in God's name, I don't know, but they do. But that, they have absolutely no fear about putting this stuff in their arm. They have no idea what it is, but they're super against using their credit cards online. I mean, my mother and father, they'll go on a rant for 20 minutes about never, ever, ever putting your information online because you're going to get your identity stolen and this and that. Now, look, I'm not suggesting that doesn't happen. I've had my own credit cards compromised. I understand it's a pain in the butt. Nobody likes that. But it's just to highlight an example. This is what they're afraid of. They're afraid of something that in comparison to the thing that goes in your arm is so small, so minuscule. And yet they're so passionate about never using your credit card online. And I think to myself, where is that same sense of concern or for self-preservation? Why do you have such an intense opinion about a credit card and identity theft? But when it comes to not even being able to identify the contents of what's in that vial that's going inside of you, you just blindly trust. And the answer to that, of course, is because they listen to the TV all day. They've been completely programmed. Now, my parents, they're the baby boomer generation. They completely grew up. They were the first generation watching the TV. And yes, back in their early days, in the early days of TV, when they were children, for the most part, TV was wholesome. That's how they lured everybody in. That's how they set the hook, the trap. And so as a result, my parents, they grew up watching the TV, believing everything that they ever heard on TV, and that hasn't changed. But what they don't recognize is that the TV completely programs their brain. That's why it's called programming. Television. Tell-a-vision. I mean, it's all right there in front of your face. And they've had their brains completely crippled by this evil machine. I mean, I'll tell you the truth, folks. If I'm in front of a screen, it's not a TV screen most of the time. I mean, yes, I listen to, as you would expect, I listen to podcasts, I watch certain videos, but I haven't watched mainstream television, any kind of programming in years at this point. I just simply won't do it. I look at the television as a weapon. It's a weapon system. And people can say, well, of course, I think my audience would probably agree. Some people would say that's hyperbole. No, it isn't. If you go and you actually research the history of how they established the TV and what the purpose of it was, in the same way that if you go and research the purpose of establishing the internet, of course, we turned that against them. We used the internet against them, but it was not the way it was designed to basically corral all of us for their own evil purposes. But of course, God had other plans. But I mean, in terms of the TV, it was created and it was put inside, it was made available to be put inside every home in the world for a reason, folks. And it wasn't so that it could keep us entertained and informed. And that's what really being awake is about understanding the system. It's about understanding the establishment. It's about understanding, being able to discern and see through the lie. And there are people out there who are, unfortunately, I mean, there are more and more people who are just beginning to tap into this ability. Like I said, that cognitive dissonance. And that's the other thing. I think cognitive dissonance, sometimes for a lot of people, they can tolerate quite a bit of it. In this inverted matrix world that we live in, they can tolerate quite a bit of it because that's constantly what we're getting is cognitive dissonance at one level. But I think it's getting so extreme that people are hitting their breaking point. And they're being forced by their own conscience to start asking questions. And that's a process, obviously, that's been ongoing for years. That's what happened in our lives. That's ultimately what brought us together. But this happens at different stages and different times for different people. And, Juan was talking about this idea of consensus, and I've talked about this as well, that we have to get to that point where there's a coherency and a consensus. And a coherency is very important because, of course, we live in a world that's incoherent by design. It's meant to shatter our society into a million different groups and subsets and lobbyists. And I mean, it's designed that way. It's designed to create incoherency. And this whole patriot movement has really been about all of us in our own way contributing to getting the truth out there so that we could ultimately arrive at that consensus, at that coherency, where enough people, a critical mass of people, would finally understand and accept the world as it is. At least enough of it. So that we can get to a point where we can have not a civil war, but a revolution. And there is a massive difference between the two. We don't want to take up arms against our fellow citizens. That's what the enemy has always wanted. That's what they've always been trying to engineer. And what they've been trying to avoid is exactly what we have been pushing for and what we will get, which is a revolution. And in comparison, a very peaceful revolution to what a civil war, which of course ultimately would have amounted to a revolution, would have delivered. I mean, a civil war, we all know what would happen. Billions of people would die. And for what? We don't want to kill off our brothers and sisters. We don't want that. We want to kill off the enemy. And for the first time, we're getting to that point where that coherency, that consensus within our society, I think is getting so close. It's always been hard for me to judge based upon where I live and the absolute insanity that I'm surrounded by. But as I often say, for myself, I have to scroll back and remember that my perspective has to be of the world and of the country as a whole, and really of the world as a whole, not just my specific area where I live. And 8 out of 10 people have to ultimately be on the same page if we are going to have that relatively peaceful revolution. Yes, using the military. The military has always been the only way. We know that. We understand that. And in this devolution process, we've learned, and we are continuing to learn, who the real traitors are, who the fake patriots are. And I have to tell you, I mean, when I first started this journey, a lot of the voices that I was listening to have since ultimately, let's just say, been proven to be very disappointing. And I'm hearing more and more information come out. I mean, people that I used to listen to, and I'm not going to mention people by name, but people that I used to listen to and had a lot of respect for, I'm now starting to find out that these people aren't exactly who we thought. These are the plants that we've been warned about. And the reason that I'm not going to mention names is because I think it's important for people to do their own research and to come up with their own opinions on things. And I also recognize I don't want to call anybody out before I've 100% determined that they are not who they say they are. But we've talked a lot about this on this show that, I mean, look, people can decide what they want even about me. I mean, I tell people who I am to a certain degree. I mean, that I'm just an ordinary American. I'm not anybody well known or anything like that. I'm just an American who has a voice and is trying to use it to help discover the truth and to help share that truth. But even, some people will listen to me and they'll think, oh, that's a psyop, or, oh, they don't believe what I say or whatever. And that's fine. Everybody has to do that on an individual level. I think that's very, very important. But there are people out there. And again, before I started podcasting myself, I was a listener just like all of you. And there are people out there that I listen to, that I put a lot of trust in, quite frankly. And have since come to find out that these people really are plants. They're agent provocateurs. They are controlled opposition. Call it what you want. But they're not really on our side. And it's just yet another reason, it highlights yet another reason why this process has been taking the time that it's been taking to flush all of this out. And we often talk about how the enemy has been in control for thousands of years. And over this time period, I mean, heck, even if you don't want to say thousands of years, let's just say decades. They've had decades and decades to get their people, to get their plants, to get their moles, to infiltrate every aspect of our society. And not just every aspect of the establishment, but also every aspect of the patriot movement. Maybe not every aspect, but because I do believe that the traitors had been rooted out at the highest level, we wouldn't be at this position, or in this position, I should say, had they not been. But there's been a lot of infiltration, folks. I mean, we're talking about groups that I really thought that were on the up and up. Certain patriot groups, certain militia groups. All of these, they all get infiltrated by the enemy. The patriot movement itself. And that's what I think makes this particularly difficult for people, because a lot of folks out there, they just simply don't know who to believe. They don't know what to believe. They put their trust in certain people, and then it turns out that those people aren't trustworthy after all. Or they're hiding something. And it just makes this fog of war all the more complex and all the more seemingly impossible to sift through. But for me, I can only tell people what I do. And that is ultimately, I remain aligned with the truth. That's where my allegiance lies. It's not with any person. It's not with any voice. It's not with any insider. It's not even with Trump. I mean, ultimately, it's with God, because God is truth. And that's really what I'm after, is trying to figure out what's really going on out there, what's really happening in the world. And I have to accept that some of the positions or some of the people that I believed in and had a certain positive outlook on, some of these positions are going to have to be reevaluated the more time goes on, because the White Hats knew that all of these people who have infiltrated had this period of darkness not unfolded the way it did, and is continuing to. That a lot of these creatures, these swamp rats, never would have been identified for who they really are. And this evil would have remained cloaked, and would have, at a certain point, after whatever shift took place, it would reinvent itself. And that's really what it comes down to. And that's why, I mean, I understand out there, and I agree with folks. I mean, that's why the truth and all the truth coming out is so vitally important. Because we are just swimming in an ocean of lies, and we have been for decades and decades and decades. And that's why we're in this position. You know, I was talking about the other day showing some restraint in terms of, you know, what is revealed to the public in terms of the horrific actions against children, the satanic ritual abuse, all that stuff. And I still believe that there needs to be some thought put into that because it's so horrific. But I've also made very clear that I don't believe that any of this stuff should really be ultimately any of the truth about not only the really dark satanic stuff, but also how the Alliance actually carried out this plan. I don't think that any of that truth should be hidden from people who are searching for it and people who want to know. I mean, we have to have a new world and a new society that's based upon the truth. Because if we don't have that as our foundation, then what are we building, folks? All we're going to be rebuilding is this house of cards, this house of lies. And the thing about lies and deception, and I was thinking about this the other day, is that they're very comfortable. You know, when you've accepted a lie that is designed to make you feel more comfortable in your apathy, in your laziness, in your narcissism, the lie is very comfortable. Fits like a nice, comfy old pair of shoes. And that's just it. You know, we have gotten so used to accepting their lies. It's not just simply that their lies are what they presented to us, and therefore we just simply accepted it. We also accepted it because there was a certain comfort in accepting the cabal's lies. This idea that we could just sit back on cruise control and let these people run our lives and believe that they had our best interest in mind was a very comfortable lie, because it allowed us to be apathetic. It allowed us to not accept our own and have some sense of accountability, accept our own responsibility for our own world and our lives. And that's a major adjustment too. So the new world, this new society that we're building has to be built upon facts. It has to be built upon truth. And that means that we have to have a full revelation about our history, how we got to this point, how this war was fought on every level, up in space, underneath the ground. We need full disclosure on the non-terrestrials, both positive and negative. And I do believe we're going to get that disclosure, but we need the truth on all fronts. It needs to happen so that people can have that transformation in their minds, where they're no longer conditioned to just simply believe a comfortable lie, but rather they're now conditioned to confront uncomfortable truths. Why? So that we can preserve our very species, so that we can preserve our way of life, so that we can ultimately ascend and have that better life that all of us know is possible and really is imminent for all of us. You know, I mentioned the other day that I truly do believe that the righteous pay a sacrifice to get what they deserve, and that sacrifice that we've been paying, that sacrifice all along of this oppression, this persecution, for standing up for the truth, for believing in the truth, that sacrifice is being paid and has been paid this entire time. And we're at a point now where God has determined, and he knows where everybody stands. He knows that each of us have chosen aside. We've chosen to stand with the Lord, regardless of how this goes down, regardless of what ends up happening. Each and every one of us have made a conscious decision. And that decision, God has heard loud and clear. And not only has he heard our decision, he's also heard the decision of all the others out there. We're in a season of choosing. And our choice, the one that we made, and the one that we would make again, at least I would, was the path that was more difficult up front. We chose a path that we were going to remain on in isolation for quite some time. And I talked about this the other day, the idea that the way that God designed this journey for all of us is to have us go on our own individual quest, to get closer to him, to find our courage, to confront our own demons, to strengthen ourselves on an individual level spiritually, so that eventually all of us would build the character that would form this new road, that all of our individual paths would converge into, and we would no longer be walking alone. And that's where we are right now. And it's not really about religion. I was reflecting on this the other day as well. You know, religion, there are many different religions, and people have different attitudes and overall perspective on religion. I've heard a lot of folks that I deeply respect suggest that religion really has just been was a social construct by the cabal to keep us all corralled, and to, of course, to lie to us, to keep all of the key information that we would need on our spiritual journey. They corralled us into these pens with religion and lied to us and told us, preached all these falsehoods, knowing full well that it was going to divide us and keep us away from the truth. And I'm not here necessarily to whole-scale condemn religion, but rather what I'm talking about is the difference between spirituality and religion. And I think that, for me anyway, spirituality is a constant conversation with God. I mean, at this point in my life, I feel, especially now, I feel like I'm in constant conversation. Constant consciousness is focused on, at least at some level, is focused on God. I'm always feeling as if at some level I'm communicating with God. And to me, that's what spirituality is. Religion is the practice and the prayers and the dogma. But spirituality for me is about the relationship. And I venture to say that most, if not all, of my audience have a deep and profound and meaningful relationship with God. That is indeed the most important relationship in their life. At least that's what's true for me. And I'm recognizing more and more that relationship, the more that I nurture it, the more that I seek him, the more he responds to me, the more blessing he delivers into my life. I take one step toward God, he takes 3 steps toward me. And that's happening not just with me and not just with you, but this is happening all over the world. Those steps that we take toward God are steps toward recognition of the truth, trying to find and identify the lie, and thereby the enemy that is continually preaching the lie. And it's an incredible, empowering experience when you realize what the truth actually is amidst this world of lies. Yes, it comes with a whole bunch of headaches. It comes with like we say, we've all been persecuted. People can say what they want, and people have been persecuted at different levels by different institutions, sometimes just simply within their own families. But all of us have felt that persecution. because we chose, again, it comes back to that free will. We chose a path. It was really the only path that we could choose, at least for me anyway. It never really felt like a choice. It just seemed intuitive for me to gravitate toward the truth. But I also recognized that it was a choice that I made. And because of that choice, I chose the path of having to sacrifice over all of these years, that sense of, I guess, inclusion in society, that sense of fulfillment, all of these things that I've talked about, especially recently, that have been missing in my life, I didn't even understand the depth and the gravity of what was missing in my life until I was introduced to what was missing in my life in the form of this podcast, this audience, the people that I've connected with as a result. I had absolutely no idea how significant what was missing in my life actually was. And that, I believe, is the whole purpose of me having to go through all of these years of feeling that sense of isolation and wishing that it were different, wishing that I could find people who seemed to speak my language, who seem to communicate or want to communicate about the same things in the same way, instead of always feeling this sense of discord and this sense of frustration that no matter where I went, no matter who I met, it just seemed like everybody was speaking a different language. And then along comes this audience, along comes this platform, along comes this blessing from God, this opportunity. And here we all are. What a beautiful, amazing experience this has been. I'm so grateful, folks. I really am. And I hope that everybody out there enjoyed this message this morning. I'm going to leave you in just a couple of minutes, but I wanted to make sure that everybody understands that right now, where we are, this epic moment in history, is going to be, like I've talked about these past couple of days, is going to be studied and celebrated for thousands and thousands of years. Because the decision that you made by standing up for the truth, by adhering to the truth, by not being bullied, by not being a coward, that's the reason that we're here. That's the reason that we have ground to stand on, because of people like you. Because I'll tell you something, folks. There are a lot of people out there for a lot of years who just really felt like they were a voice in the wilderness. A lot of podcasters, a lot of people who came out well before the Great Awakening really began, and there were before people were really ready to hear the truth. And I have to say, for those people, I have an enormous amount of respect for those people, because fortunately for me, when I started this journey, I started this journey on fertile ground. Everybody was already thirsty and hungry for the truth, and I just have to, tip my hat to all the people out there who came before me, who enabled the ground to be as fertile as it was for the minds of people to gravitate toward the truth. But the fact that you folks are out there just makes all the difference. You are the salt of the earth. And as I've been saying over and over and over, in these final days and weeks, and who knows, perhaps months, regardless of the timeline, this is not the time to lose faith. This is not the time to be deceived. You've kept your faith. You've kept your discernment. You've kept your strength. You've kept your courage. You've kept your will to do God's work all this time. Now is not the time to question any of those things. Now is the time to double down, triple down, quadruple down, no matter how many times is necessary until we see this thing through. But I do believe, as I've said, we're days away now. It could even be today. Who knows? Could be tomorrow, from this major shock event that I do believe is going to be an arrest. And the minute that happens, I'm going to be on here and we're going to be discussing it. So thank you, everybody. God bless you. Thank you for all of your support. Please do everything that you can to continue to support my work and my channel. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to all of my different platforms, Rumble, BitChute, YouTube, and Podbean. Make sure you let me know in the comments what your reaction to today's podcast was, and let me know your thoughts and your feelings. It really does warm my heart. Your feedback is so powerful to me. So thank you, everybody. God bless and Godspeed. I'll be back soon. Patriot out.